Good evening, all. A very big hello to each one of you. I thank Dr. Raghunandan and his team for giving me this opportunity today to present to you about the anatomical basis of facial nerve lesions. Why do you think it's important to listen to this lecture? Of course, I understand that most of my audience today for this presentation are from first MBBS. Facial nerve is a very frequently asked essay question. And there are lot important MCQs from this topic. Apart from that, when you go to clinical side, definitely you'll come to get to see patients with facial nerve injuries. And not only that, many people among you will be aspiring to become neurosurgeon and plastic surgeon, isn't it? So if you could have a sound anatomical knowledge about facial nerve, that will help you very much in this profession. So in this presentation, I have included a lot of important topics, not only from the most common textbooks, but also from the recent articles from journals. Okay? So whenever we think about facial nerve, the one thing that immediately comes in our mind is injury to facial nerve will result in paralysis of facial muscles. But it's not that alone. Injury to the facial nerve can result in loss of taste sensation, absence of tear secretion, absence of or decreased salivation, decreased threshold to sound, which is called hyperacusis. Even a small whisper will sound as a noise. Not only that, the immediate relation of the facial nerve is also very important. Okay, because any injury to the facial nerve can also include its neighboring structures. What is that you're seeing in this picture? Internal squint. So what is the nerve behind that? And what is its relation to the facial nerve? Okay, we'll see that. So what do you see in this picture? Ipsilateral paralysis of the face on one side and contralateral paralysis of the other side of the body. Okay, so what is the syndrome called? What is the structure associated with facial nerve in this? Yeah, crocodile tear syndrome. What is that? Postural imbalance. So what is the nerve behind that? What is its relation to facial nerve? Okay, so all this is what we are going to understand in this presentation today and something more. So this is what I was talking about. So facial nerve injury doesn't exclusively involve facial muscle paralysis alone. There's lot more to add to it. And that is the purpose of this lecture. So if you want to write about facial nerve as an essay or as a detailed answer, these are the headings under which we have to read about it. Introduction, embryology, the development of facial nerve, nuclei of origin, the cause, relations, branches of facial nerve, the functional components, ganglia associated with facial nerve, blood supply of facial nerve, patterns, variation patterns in its branching, testing of facial nerve, identification of facial nerve, complications of facial dissection, facial nerve lesions, acquired and congenital anomalies. So how we are going to remember all this? That's a big question, isn't it? So if you try to remember the facial nerve as such, from the beginning, starting very beginning from the nucleus, the cause of it, the branches, the distribution up to its termination, as a story that will be helpful to retain the facts related to facial nerve. So today in this presentation, we are going to see the story of facial nerve. This is one story that I frequently tell to my kids. Yeah, you also must be knowing, isn't it? So this picture I just put to explain the functional components of facial nerve. What is it? Special visceral efferent, also called branchiomotor. We know that the facial nerve is the nerve of the second pharyngeal arch, and it's going to supply the muscles derived from the second pharyngeal arch. Why is it called special visceral? Normally, the skeletal muscles of the body, they develop from myotone component of the somites, which are derived from paraxial mesoderm. Okay. The muscles of the face, they are derived from the mesoderm of the pharyngeal arches. Okay. Hence, these motor fibers, which are going to supply the muscles derived from the second pharyngeal arch, they are classified as branchiomotor or special visceral efferent. Next comes the general visceral efferent. What do you mean by that term? Efferent is motor. Visceral efferent, these are secretomotor fibers. Parasympathetic secretomotor fibers. Preganglionic parasympathetic secretomotor fibers that pass through the facial nerve, they are going to supply the lacrimal gland and the submandibular and sublingual salivary gland. The third one, special visceral efferent. Okay, the taste sensation from the anterior two-thirds of the tongue and also the taste sensation from the soft palate. Those fibers are classified under special visceral efferent. Apart from the three little pigs, one more character to the story. Who's that? Yeah, apart from the three functional columns, we shouldn't forget the fourth one, the general somatic afferent. Okay. So what is this general somatic afferent? Soma, we know it is the body wall. So these are the sensory fibers which are going to innervate the skin over the auricle. To be more specific, the skin over the concha of the auricle. Okay. Those fibers, they are classified under general somatic afferent. Okay, so this is the region of concha where my pointer is. Can you see? So this area of the skin is innervated by the sensory fibers of the facial nerve. Okay, embryology. When and how does the facial nerve develop? So around the third week of intrauterine life, okay, we have the facio-acoustic primordia. This is the one that's going to develop into the facial nerve and its components. So by the end of the third month of intrauterine life, the facial nerve is nearly formed. And we know that the facial nerve has a motor component, a large motor component and a small sensory component. So the motor component of the facial nerve, it develops from the basal plate of embryonic pons. The sensory component of the facial nerve, you must be reading it in your textbooks, it is called as nervus intermedius or nervus intermediofacialis. Okay. It is also called glossopalatine nerve. Okay. Because it's going to receive the taste sensation from the anterior two-thirds of the tongue and soft palate. Okay. This sensory component of the facial nerve is derived or developed from the neural crestals of the cranium. Okay, cranial neural crestals. Yeah, so we know about the functional columns. Somatic efferent, general visceral efferent, special visceral efferent, and then general somatic efferent. And then there's one more controversy area, the general visceral afferent. Okay, some textbooks tell that the general sensations from the mucosa of the nasal cavity, paranasal sinuses, as well as the soft palate, okay, is carried by the fibers of the facial nerve, which come and relay over the cranial end of nucleus tractus solitarius. Okay. Now coming to the nuclei related to facial nerve, the most important is the motor nucleus of facial nerve. Okay, so the facial nerve, we know it's going to emerge at the pontomedullary junction. And the nuclei related to the facial nerve, they are situated in the lower pons. Okay, this is the motor nucleus of the facial nerve that's going to give rise to the motor fibers of the facial nerve. Adjacent to it, we have the superior salivatory nucleus that's going to give rise to the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers, secretomotor fibers, to the lacrimal gland, to the submandibular and sublingual salivary gland. And then we have the cranial end of the nucleus tractus solitarius that's going to receive the taste sensation from the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. Apart from that, the Wolfe component, do you remember? Yeah, the general sensation from the concha of the auricle. That's the general somatic afferent. That sensation is received by the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Okay, it could be an important MCQ. Please remember. And the last one, what did I tell? The general sensation from the nasal cavity, paranasal sinus, as well as the soft palate. Okay, that is also received by the cranial end of nucleus tractus solitarius, which also functions as general visceral afferent column. Okay, yeah, this is one most important diagram. So we'll get oriented to the diagram first. So here you see the brainstem where my pointer is. This area bulged out, that's the pons. Above it we have the midbrain and below it the medulla oblongata. What did we see? In the lower pons we have the nuclei related to the facial nerve. So this is the motor nucleus of the facial nerve. Then you get to see the superior salivatory nucleus and then the abducent nucleus. Okay, the sixth nerve nucleus. Okay, this is the pontomedullary junction through which the seventh nerve is going to exit out. This one is the internal acoustic meatus. Okay, which lies in the posterior surface of the petrous part of the temporal bone in the posterior cranial fossa. Okay, and then this is a diagram showing the ear, the internal ear, the middle ear. Okay, and then you can see the stylomastoid foramen here and then the face. Okay, so the cause of the facial nerve can be further divided into parts. To start with, first we have the intrapontine cause of the facial nerve. So you see the motor nucleus of the facial nerve, the fibers coming from this nucleus, they sort of take a U-bend. Okay, U-turn around the abducent nerve nucleus. Yeah, that we are going to call it as facial colliculus or the internal genu of the facial nerve. Okay, and then it comes ventrally and then exits out through the pontomedullary junction. Okay, so this internal genu and the cause of the facial nerve fibers within the pons, that we call it as intrapontine part. Okay, then it exits the pons at the pontomedullary junction by two routes, the motor route and the sensory route. The motor route, I told you, it's large, it lies medial. The sensory route lies lateral and it is small, and we call it as the nervus intermedius or the glossopalatine nerve. Okay, now as soon as it exits out of the pons at the pontomedullary junction, where does the seventh nerve comes to lie? In the subarachnoid space close to the cerebellopontine angle. That we call it as the cerebellopontine cistern. Okay, this cause of the facial nerve in the subarachnoid space till it reaches the internal acoustic meatus, that is called cisternal segment. Do you want me to repeat it again? So the seventh nerve exits the pons at the pontomedullary junction. After that, it comes to lie in the subarachnoid space. Okay, so that is called the cisternal segment. Okay, from the exit to the internal acoustic meatus. And then the cause of the facial nerve in the internal acoustic meatus, that we call it as the meatal part or the intracanalicular part. Okay, Got it? Intracanalicular part. Once it enters the inner ear through the internal acoustic meatus, okay, we know that the inner ear and the middle ear, they lie within the petrous part of the temporal bone. Okay, so this entire thing we are going to call it as the course of the facial nerve within the petrous part of the temporal bone. We are going to call it as petrous part. This petrous part is further divided into three segments. Okay, so the first segment begins from the entry into the ear soon after it leaves the internal acoustic meatus. So from the internal acoustic meatus up to the geniculate ganglion where it takes a bend, that is called the labyrinthine portion. Okay, so this part of the facial nerve within the bony canal, it's called the fallopian canal. This labyrinthine portion has a lot of significant features which we'll be discussing very soon. And then the second segment, that's the horizontal portion that you see here, that's called the tympanic portion or the tympanic segment. Okay, this tympanic segment, it lies below the lateral semicircular canal. We also call it as the horizontal part of the facial nerve canal in the medial wall of the middle ear. Okay, and then the third segment is the one that you see here, the mastoidal portion, which runs vertically downwards in the posterior wall of the middle ear. Okay, so the petrous portion is divided into a labyrinthine segment, tympanic segment, and the mastoid segment. Okay, and this is the internal genu within the pons. This bend that you see here at the junction of the labyrinthine and the tympanic segment, okay, that's the external genu or the first bend. Okay, and then this one that you see here at the junction of the tympanic segment and the mastoid segment, okay, in relation to the pyramidal eminence of the posterior wall of middle ear, that's the second bend or the second external genu of facial nerve. What happens after that? The vertical segment, it exits out through the stylomastoid foramen, okay, and then it enters the parotid gland to terminate, okay. So even before entering the parotid, it gives off few branches that we call it as the pre-parotid branches, and the terminal branches within the parotid gland, they describe the pes anserinus pattern of branching. Okay, the intraparotid branches. Clear with it? Okay, the intrapontine segment, cisternal part. Why is it called cisternal part? In relation to the cerebellopontine cistern. Intracanalicular or the meatal segment, petrous part with the three segments, extratemporal or the extracranial part of the facial nerve. Got it? Yeah. Now I have made a tabular column comparing these segments. Okay, the extent of each segment, the length of each segment, the branches given off from each segment, the name of the branches, okay, and the important clinical features of these segment. Okay, so the labyrinthine segment, there is a portion from the internal acoustic meatus to the geniculate ganglion that will give rise to three branches: the greater petrosal nerve, the external petrosal nerve, and the communicating branch to otic ganglion. Similarly, the mastoid segment will give rise to three branches: the nerve to scapedius, cauda tympani branch, and the nerve to supply the concha of the auricle. The extratemporal segment, I told you, pre-parotid and intraparotid branches. The pre-parotid part, it gives branch to supply the auricular muscles. Remember, the auricular is anterior, auricular is superior, auricular is posterior. Okay, those muscles. And the posterior auricular nerve to supply the occipital belly of occipitofrontalis. And then a nerve to supply the stylohyoid and posterior belly of digastric muscles. Of these segments, the most important, clinically important, is the labyrinthine segment. Why so? It is the shortest segment. It is the narrowest segment. Remember, I told you that area is called fallopian canal. Okay. So this is the one which is commonly involved in lower motor neuron type of facial nerve palsy, the Bell's palsy. And Another very important point, this labyrinthine segment is most susceptible to vascular compromise. Yeah, I have listed the reason in the upcoming slides. We'll see that. Okay, so make sure you're thorough with this table. A lot of MCQs are there here. Yeah. So intrapontine course, we saw that the facial nerve is going to wind around the abducens nerve nucleus, isn't it? Okay. So the facial nerve nucleus is actually situated ventrolateral to the abducens nerve nucleus. The fibers emerging from this, they go dorsally, medially, wind around it, they turn ventrolaterally to exit out. Okay. So this part is called facial colliculus. Okay. So facial colliculus, if they are going to ask you as a short note on that, you should be able to talk about it in detail. So the facial colliculus is seen over the lower pons, dorsal aspect, and there are two components adding to it. One is the internal genu of the facial nerve, the motor fibers of the facial nerve, okay, and the underlying abducent nerve nucleus. Okay, so why this has to happen? Heard about neurobiotaxis? Okay, so what you see in blue here is the motor nucleus of the facial nerve. The red one here is the abducent nerve nucleus. Can you see something yellow here? Yeah, that is the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. So why is this happening? The facial colliculus, everything? Yeah. So the migration of the facial nerve nucleus, okay, to occupy a position in close proximity with the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, okay, that is called neurobiotaxis. It happens in the embryonic period. Why this should happen? To establish a quicker response. We know that the skin over the face is innervated by trigeminal nerve and the muscles of the face innervated by facial nerve. Okay. So if something hot is going to fall over your face, you quickly wipe it out, isn't it? Okay. So the quicker response, okay, between the sensory and the motor component, that has to be established by this neurobiotaxis. The motor and the sensory nucleus related to the face are brought close together by this neurobiotaxis. Okay, this is what I told you. So this pink one here is the facial nerve nucleus. This one, excuse me, this blue one that you see here is the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. This orange one is the motor nucleus of the facial nerve. And this purple one or pink one is the abducens nucleus. Okay, so what happens actually in the early embryonic period? The motor nucleus of the facial nerve initially lies dorsolateral to the cranial aspect of the abducens nerve nucleus. But what happens later? This motor nucleus of the facial nerve migrates. It migrates caudally along the dorsal aspect of the abducens nerve nucleus. It goes medially, ventrally, laterally to reach its finally the ventrolateral position to the abducens nerve nucleus. Okay, and immediately medial to the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. This is called neurobiotaxis. Apart from facial nerve, do you know any other nerves undergoing neurobiotaxis? Okay, if so, please enter in the comment box. Yeah, I told you neurobiotaxis is to establish quicker reflex responses over the face. Yeah. Now we have done with the intrapontine course. We are coming to the cisternal segment. Okay, you see the cerebellum here, the midbrain, pons and medulla. So here is the CP angle. Okay, so in the cisternal segment, okay, the abducent nerve lies medial to the seventh nerve and the eighth nerve lies lateral to the seventh nerve. CP angle tumor, most commonly acoustic neuroma or the vestibular schwannoma, that's the most common tumor of the posterior cranial fossa. It commonly involves the eighth cranial nerve, but because the seventh cranial nerve is closely related to the eighth nerve, that can also get involved. Okay, so if this happens, then apart from the eighth nerve disturbances, that is with hearing loss, tinnitus and postural disturbance, we can see the patient presenting with facial muscle paralysis. Yeah. Now coming to the meatal segment, okay. So what you see here is the internal acoustic meatus. Okay. So the floor of the internal acoustic meatus is the one that you're seeing in this diagram. It is divided by a ridge, a transverse ridge, which is called the falciform crest, okay, into an upper segment and lower segment. The upper segment is further divided by another vertical ridge called the Bill's bar into an anterior portion where my pointer is exactly, okay, and a posterior part. The antero-superior part of the internal acoustic meatus is traversed by the facial nerve, okay. Immediately behind it, we have the superior division of the vestibular nerve. Below the falciform crest, anteriorly we have the cochlear division of the eighth nerve. Behind that, we have the inferior division of the vestibular nerve. So we know that the seventh nerve and the eighth nerve, they are going to enter the internal acoustic meatus. The vestibular division is going to split into a superior division and inferior division. So that we can easily tell. Superior division goes above the falciform crest and inferior division below the falciform crest. The only confusion is between the seventh nerve and the cochlear division. Remember, the seventh nerve lies in the antero-superior part, okay, and the cochlear division below. Okay, this is another mnemonic, you can use it, 7-Up and Coca-Cola below, okay. Yeah, now coming to the petrous part of the facial nerve, okay, we saw that it's divided into three segments, the labyrinthine portion from the internal acoustic meatus to the geniculate ganglion, okay. You see the geniculate ganglion here. Remember the three branches coming out from there? The greater petrosal nerve. Yeah. And then external petrosal nerve. And the third one, communicating branch to the otic ganglion. The second segment is the horizontal course. Okay. Below the lateral semicircular canal, which we call it as tympanic segment. It is seen over the medial wall of the middle ear. And the third segment, the mastoid segment, it runs vertically downwards over the posterior wall of the middle ear. Okay. So this is the first genu I told you, which has the geniculate ganglion. The second genu in relation to the pyramidal eminence. Okay. A little bit detail about the geniculate ganglion. So we saw the geniculate ganglion, isn't it, at the first genu in the anteriormost part of the fallopian canal at the junction between the labyrinthine segment and the tympanic segment. This geniculate ganglion, it presents as an asymmetrical swelling of the facial nerve. And something very special about it is it has pseudo-unipolar neurons. Do you know anywhere, any other part of the anatomy which has pseudo-unipolar neurons? Dorsal root ganglion, mesencephalic nucleus, superior inferior ganglion of vagus nerve, geniculate ganglion. Okay. Then three branches I've told you. Okay. Coming to the pseudo-unipolar neurons, okay, the peripheral process of these neurons, okay, they are going to receive the taste sensation from the anterior two-third of the tongue via the chorda tympani nerve. They also receive the taste sensation from the soft palate via the lesser palatine nerve. Okay, so these are the ones which are going to synapse here over the geniculate ganglion. The cutaneous sensation from the concha of the auricle, okay, that also passes through the geniculate ganglion. And the preganglionic secretomotor fibers and the other motor fibers, they also pass through the geniculate ganglion. What happens to the central process of the geniculate ganglion if you trace it further? Okay, so the central process of the pseudo-unipolar neurons which contribute the geniculate ganglion, they reach the nucleus tractus solitarius. Please remember, in the geniculate ganglion, there's only synapse of the fibers carrying taste sensation. Okay, so the central process, they reach the nucleus tractus solitarius. The efferents from the nucleus tractus solitarius forms the solitariothalamic tract. The solitariothalamic tract, it relays over the ventro-postromedial nucleus of the thalamus. and the efferent fibers from this nucleus is projected to the primary sensory cortex of the postcentral gyrus, area 3, 1 and 2, for perception of taste sensation. Okay. A few words about the greater petrosal nerve. It is also called greater superficial petrosal nerve. Do you know any other petrosal nerves? Okay, try to find out what are these. Deep petrosal nerve, lesser petrosal nerve, external petrosal nerve. Okay. The greater petrosal nerve is what's going to arise from the geniculate ganglion. It carries the preganglionic parasympathetic secretomotor fibers to the lacrimal gland and also to the nasal gland and palatine glands. So the greater petrosal nerve will join with the deep petrosal nerve to form the nerve of pterygoid canal that relays in the pterygopalatine ganglion. Okay. So the facial nerve is related to geniculate ganglion, pterygopalatine ganglion. Okay. Yeah, the greater petrosal nerve also receives the general visceral sensation from the mucosa of the nasal cavity and the paranasal sinuses as well as soft palate. Okay. So it also includes the taste fibers from the soft palate which are carried via the lesser palatine nerve and greater palatine nerve. A few words about the chorda tympani branch. So it arises from the mastoid segment 6 millimeter above the stylomastoid foramen. This chorda tympani nerve, it will join the lingual nerve in the infratemporal fossa and through it, it will be distributed to the tongue. It's going to carry the taste sensation from the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. It will also convey the preganglionic secretomotor fibers to the submandibular and sublingual salivary gland, okay, through the submandibular ganglia. So the facial nerve is related to geniculate ganglion, pterygopalatine ganglion, and submandibular ganglion. Okay. Yeah, once it exits the stylomastoid foramen, the preparotid branches arising from it will be the branch to the auricular muscles, auricularis anterior, auricularis posterior, auricularis superior. Remember, there's no auricularis inferior muscle. Okay, and then we'll have the posterior auricular branch to supply the occipital belly of occipitofrontalis. Okay, and then branch to supply the stylohyoid and posterior belly of digastric. Once it enters the parotid gland, it's going to terminate into two trunks, temporophageal and cervicofacial trunk. Okay, so the temporophageal is the one which is going to divide into temporal and zygomatic branch. Okay, the cervicofacial will divide into buccal, marginal mandibular, and the cervical branch. Okay, so this pattern of branching of facial nerve within the parotid gland is described as pes uncinus branching. And the relation of the facial nerve within the parotid gland is important, isn't it? So it lies superficial. And another interesting fact is that the facial nerve and its branches, they do not supply the parotid gland, though they lie within it. Okay. So deep to the facial nerve, we'll have the retromandibular vein, and then deep to it, we have the external carotid artery termination. This plane separating the facial nerve from the retromandibular vein is called as faciovenous plane of Pate. So any surgery over the parotid gland or over the face in this area, okay, it can injure the facial nerve or its branches. The most commonly injured facial nerve branches, the marginal mandibular division, because of the variation in its course. It has a lot of variation in its course, that's why. Okay, and another branch is the temporal branch of the facial nerve. Okay, it's most susceptible to injury at the lateral border of frontalis muscle, because at the lateral border of frontalis muscle, that area is actually subcutaneous. Okay, there's little amount of fat between the nerve and the skin. So they have actually described a landmark called as the Pitangua line or the Middleton's line, which runs here, okay, from the 0.5 centimeter below the tragus up to a line reaching the 1 centimeter above the lateral canthus of the eye. Okay. So this is an important landmark to identify the temporal branch of facial nerve to prevent its injury. Here you can see it. Okay. So we have seen enough about the course, the branches, and what it supplies of facial nerve, isn't it? Okay. So you can go through this diagram later to revise it. Okay. Something very important is, yeah, the upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. What do you understand? Like, yeah, since my audience, most of you are from first year MBBS, I want you to understand what is upper motor neuron, what is lower motor neuron. The term upper motor neuron refers to the neurons in the motor cortex of the cerebrum. Got it? Okay. So the motor neurons, which are going to give rise to the motor fibers, okay, in the cerebral cortex, they are called upper motor neuron. Whereas the motor neurons in the brainstem and spinal cord, they are called lower motor neurons. Okay. So normally we know that the right cerebral cortex controls the left half of the body and the left cerebral cortex controls the right half of the body. Okay. So imagine this the right cortex, that's the left cortex. Okay. Here, that's the pons here with the motor nucleus of facial nerve. So this is the face. So we divide the face into a right half and left half. Okay. Yeah, right half and left half. Then each right side and left side, we are going to divide it into an upper half and lower half. Okay. So it's important to understand that the upper half of the face is going to receive fibers from both right and left cerebral cortex. Is it clear? I'll repeat it again. Face, we are going to divide it into right and left. Okay. And the upper half of each side, okay, the upper half is going to get innervated by the fibers coming from both right and left cerebral cortex. You can see the blue fibers here from the right and the left cerebral cortex. The red one, okay, okay, that's going to innervate the upper part of the face. Okay, whereas the lower half of the face is innervated by the fibers coming from the opposite cerebral cortex. Okay, so the upper face receives bilateral innervation from the cortex, whereas the lower face receives innervation from the opposite cortex alone. This is very important. Okay, yeah. Now coming to the most important part of the lecture. So it's not only to diagnose that the patient is suffering from facial nerve injury, but also to localize where exactly the injury is. What do you mean by these three terms? Supranuclear paralysis, nuclear paralysis, infranuclear paralysis. So when I tell nuclear paralysis, it involves the lesion of the motor nucleus of the facial nerve. Supranuclear paralysis, upper motor neuron. What did I tell about upper motor neuron? The motor neurons in the cerebral cortex. Okay, the motor cortex. Infranuclear paralysis is the cause of the facial nerve anywhere along after it arises from its nucleus. Infranuclear paralysis, we also call it as the Bell's palsy. Okay, supranuclear paralysis. What is the structure involved? The motor neurons in the cerebral cortex. Okay, to be specific, the neurons in the premotor and the primary motor cortex. Why does this happen? Due to occlusion of the arteries that supply these areas. Also the internal capsule. What will be the feature of supranuclear paralysis? Yeah, we know that the cerebral cortex is going to control the opposite half of the body. Okay, so the lesion will be on the opposite side, contralateral side. Entire face? No, only the lower face, because the upper face is receiving bilateral innervation. Okay, so supranuclear paralysis, the facial paralysis will be on the contralateral side, lower part. Coming to nuclear paralysis. So lesion involving the motor nucleus of the facial nerve, okay, in the lower pons. Okay, but we know that the motor nucleus of the facial nerve is closely related to the abducens nucleus. So if the abducens nucleus is involved, then the patient can also present with internal swing. Okay, if there is involvement of the corticospinal fibers, then there will be contralateral hemiplegia. Infranuclear paralysis, also called as Bell's palsy. Okay, so here the injury is to the facial nerve. If the facial nerve is injured at the internal acoustic meatus, the meatal segment, we know that it's accompanied by the eighth nerve. So apart from Bell's palsy and other features, we'll have features related to eighth nerve lesion. Hearing loss, tinnitus, postural disturbances, and all that. Okay. If the lesion is at the geniculate ganglion, okay, it's very important. If the lesion is at the geniculate ganglion, then the patient will present with all the features except the eighth nerve lesion. Bell's palsy will be that, okay, the lacrimation, salivation, taste sensation, everything will be affected. Okay, hyperacusis. Okay. Now, if the lesion is going to be in an area between the genu and the pyramidal eminence, then two things will escape. Lacrimation, okay? Remember, the greater petrosal nerve is not involved, okay? So, the lacrimation is unaffected. And something very interesting, the taste sensation from the soft palate is also unaffected, okay? Because that's also traveling via the greater petrosal nerve, via the lesser palatine nerve, okay? Since chorda tympani is going to arise in the mastoid segment, the taste sensation from the anterior two-thirds of the tongue will be lost. Okay, so please remember, any lesion of the facial nerve between the genu and the pyramidal eminence, lacrimation and taste sensation from the soft palate is unaffected. Okay, now if there is injury to the facial nerve below the stylomastoid foramen, then only the motor component of the facial nerve is involved, resulting in ipsilateral lower motor neuron palsy or Bell's palsy. Yeah, if you want, you can take a sip of coffee, a break. Okay, meanwhile, I can explain you this slide. Okay, during the lockdown period, I've been somewhat active over the social media. Yeah, so this is my Instagram page, Anatomy Points, where usually I post competency-based image questions. Okay, and this is my YouTube channel, Anatomy Digest. I'm active on it now and then. I usually encourage my students to present on it. Yeah. Currently active in Telegram in these groups, Anatomy Made Simple, Anatomy Points, Next 1 and 2. We also have a WhatsApp group for anatomy study. Okay. You can note down the number if interested. We'll proceed on to the lecture. Yeah. Coming to the arterial supply of facial nerve. Mainly from three sources: labyrinthine artery, superficial petrosal artery, stylomastoid artery. The labyrinthine artery is a branch from anterior inferior cerebellar artery, supplying mainly the meatal segment. Superficial petrosal artery, it supplies the segment beyond the meatal segment, the labyrinthine thing. It's coming from the middle meningeal artery. The stylomastoid artery is a branch from the occipital artery. It's going to mainly supply the extratemporal part of the facial nerve. A very important clinical relevance here related to the arterial supply facial nerve is that, remember I told you in the table, labyrinthine segment is more vulnerable to ischemia, okay, because the labyrinthine segment is going to be supplied by an anastomosis between the labyrinthine artery and superficial petrosal artery, okay. It's supplied by both, but these both are very tenuous, the caliber is very small, and each artery is an end artery. Hence, it's most vulnerable to ischemia. Okay, something interesting about the facial nerve, yeah, we have to definitely talk about is corneal reflex. So what is corneal reflex? Okay, so we touch the conjunctiva of the eye with a wisp of cotton, the patient immediately closes his eyes. Okay, so the afferent component is via the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve, and the efferent component is by the nerve supplying the orbicularis oculi, that's the facial nerve. Okay, so similar to corneal reflex, we have blinking reflex, snout reflex. Please read about that also. Okay, facial nerve pathology includes Bell's palsy, congenital facial anomalies, which will be seen, Traumatic causes of facial nerve, okay? Mainly transverse fracture of the temporal bone, injury to the skull base, birth trauma, okay? Then surgery over the parotid gland, any facial injury, the facial nerve is at risk of getting injured, okay? Inflammatory causes, otitis media, we know the petrous part of the facial nerve, it's 3 segments. So any infection within the middle ear and mastoid abscess, okay? And herpes virus inflammation, yeah. Vascular disorders, neoplastic, yeah, parotid tumor, acoustic neuroma, all this could be related to facial nerve pathology. Most common is the Bell's palsy. So research have found that its incidence is around 0.08 percentage per year, and mainly people above 40 years, for fourth to sixth decade of life, they are affected. Research also shows that females are more affected. The left eye is more frequently involved, and Bell's palsy is more common in winter. It could also be due to a viral etiology, herpes simplex virus. Okay. Even many celebrities have been involved with have been affected by facial nerve Bell's palsy, and even excessive use of air conditioner. Okay. Even when you travel in a bus with the windows open or your car windows open, that cold air can trigger facial Bell's palsy. Okay. So the Bell's palsy is of sudden onset. Okay. There is a unilateral weakness of facial muscles. The patient also complains of ear pain. It can be associated with the decreased tear secretion, disturbance in taste sensation, decreased salivation, hyperacusis. Okay, around 80 to 90% they recover completely, but elderly people only 40% recover. 40% recovery is there. Usually treated with anti-inflammatory drugs, rehabilitation. Okay, diagnostic test for facial nerve injury. Okay, Sherman's test to test for lacrimation. What component are we testing? It's the general visceral efferent. Okay, the greater petrosal nerve. That's the one carrying the preganglionic secretomotor fibers, isn't it? So we are actually testing for lacrimatory function, general visceral efferent, and also to diagnose whether the lesion is at the geniculate ganglion or proximal to the geniculate ganglion. Electrogustometry. That's mainly to test the sensation from the anterior two-third of the tongue. Okay, and that's carried by the chorda tympani nerve. Electromyography. Electromyography is mainly to test the facial muscle weakness. Scapedeus reflex. Yeah, we know the nerve to scapedeus arises from the vertical segment, mastoid segment of the facial nerve. So this also helps you to diagnose where the lesion is, whether below the pyramidal eminence or above the pyramidal eminence. Electroneuronography, yeah, to test the facial muscle weakness. Okay, looking into the picture, can you diagnose the condition? You see the vesicles. So what is it? This is called the Ramsay-Hunt syndrome or the herpes zoster oticus. So why does this happen? Due to reactivation of the herpes virus in the geniculate ganglion. Okay, in patients recovering from Bell's palsy. So typically you'll see lesions, okay, in the concha of the auricle. Patient will complain of ear pain and present with ipsilateral facial paralysis. Okay, injury to the facial nerve we have seen more commonly in surgery involving the posterior cranial fossa, acoustic neuroma, surgery over the parotid gland, even an inferior alveolar nerve block during dental procedures can accidentally damage the facial nerve within the parotid gland. And any facelift procedures, okay, that can also damage the facial nerve. Since the facial nerve is an important cranial nerve, okay, which is going to not only supply the facial muscles, closing the eyelid and the Orbicularis ocular is closing the oral fissure. Even the emotional component is conveyed through the facial muscles. So it's very important to preserve the facial nerve during these surgeries. So in order to prevent injury to the facial nerve during surgeries over the face, they describe something called as the facial danger zone. Okay. So here it's marked by a line drawn from the lateral canthus of the eye to the lateral corner of the mouth, and then from the zygomatic arch to the angle of the mandible. So this area enclosed by these landmarks, okay, is the area that the facial nerve must be protected to prevent it from injury. And the plastic surgeon should also keep in mind that more distal the injury to the facial nerve, there's better chance for spontaneous recovery. Okay, this is something that I came across, Hitzelberger's sign. Okay, so in acoustic neuroma, there is loss of sensation in the postero-superior part of the external auditory meatus supplied by the Arnold's nerve, which is a branch of vagus nerve. This is called Hitzelberger's sign. Coming to syndromes, congenital syndromes related to facial nerve palsy, the most common is the Mobius syndrome. So here there's not only problem with the seventh nerve, but also with the sixth and the 12th nerve nuclei. The facial nerve itself might be absent or smaller. Okay. So here it's related to congenital extraocular muscle as well as facial palsy. There's another interesting thing that I came across, the cardiofacial syndrome. What happens here is that there is unilateral facial paralysis involving only the lower lip. Okay. So here, what is the nerve, the branch of the facial nerve supplying the muscles of the lower lip? Marginal mandibular branch, isn't it? Okay, so that's the one mainly affected. And the most important, the first arch syndrome, Treacher-Collins syndrome, also called the mandibulofacial dysostosis. Okay, so that also the facial nerve injury. Yeah, so that's also related to facial nerve palsy. Congenital causes of facial nerve palsy. Okay. Facial nerve reconstruction is usually a blessing to the people affected by facial nerve injury, isn't it? Okay. So here what they do, the reconstruction is done using the facial nerve of the opposite side, of the healthy side, or they can use another nerve graft. Okay. So the nerve graft usually chosen is the facial nerve of the opposite side, or the masseteric nerve, or even the part of the 12th nerve, sural nerve, medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm, okay, or the glossopharyngeal nerve, or even sometimes the trigeminal nerve or the spinal accessory nerve. All these have been used as nerve graft for facial nerve reconstruction. Following facial nerve reconstruction, the patient is then subjected to reanimation procedures, facelift procedures, rehabilitation. Okay, what is this crocodile tear syndrome? It is also called Bogart syndrome or gustatory lacrimation. Okay, so why does this happen? It is seen as a complication of Bell's palsy in patients recovering from Bell's palsy. So what happens in the recovery phase? The regenerating salivary nerve fibers, they are actually misdirected. Instead of entering the submandibular salivary gland, they go via the greater petrosal nerve and innervate the lacrimal gland. So whenever the patient get to see or eat food, what happened? There's a lot of tear secretion coming from it. Okay, the incidence is around 3.3% in patients suffering from Bell's palsy, and it is usually seen as a late complication around 6 to 9 months after Bell's palsy. So this is usually due to traumatic disruption of nervous intermediaries. How to manage it? Botulinum toxin injection. If we inject it, it'll stop the conduction of nerve impulses in the aberrant fibers. Okay, we saw in the first slide, isn't it? The cause for ipsilateral facial nerve paralysis and contralateral hemiplegia. That's the Millard-Gubler syndrome. Okay, it's also called the ventral pontine syndrome. So hope you have understood the anatomical basis for all this. So what is the nerve involved here? No taste sensation. Chorda tympani branch of facial nerve. What is the nerve involved here? No tears. Greater petrosal nerve. No salivation. Okay. Then it's again the chorda tympani nerve, which is going to carry the preganglionic parasympathetic secretomotor fibers to submandibular as well as sublingual salivary gland. So along with facial muscle paralysis, hyperacusis, then what is the nerve involved? Nerve 2, stapedius. Patient presenting with facial muscle paralysis plus internal squint, then it is Miller-Degubler syndrome, okay, due to involvement of sixth nerve. Ipsilateral facial paralysis, contralateral hemiplegia, that is due to involvement of the corticospinal fibers of the pyramidal tract. Crocodile tears due to involvement of nervus intermedius. Okay, so as I was preparing for this presentation, I went through a few articles and yeah, those extra points I would like to add to this presentation. Okay, so they found out that the facial nerve approximately consists of 10,000 neurons. And out of this 10,000 neurons, 7,000 is myelinated. And these myelinated fibers are the one which are going to innervate the muscles of facial expression. And the remaining 3,000 of the nerve fibers, they are the ones carrying the sensory as well as the secretomotor fibers, which make up the glossopalatine nerve. Okay. Yeah, we have seen a lot of clinical anatomy related to the labyrinthine segment. One more to add to it is that the labyrinthine segment of the facial nerve, okay, that is the one which will be seen as a normal post-contrast enhancement. Okay, normally the enhancement of other segments of facial nerve or other cranial nerves is considered pathologic. Okay, but this labyrinthine segment alone is seen as a normal post-contrast enhancement because of the vasculature surrounding it. Okay, this also I found it as interesting. It is called as the root entry or exit zone. Okay, so we know that the oligodendrocytes are responsible for myelination of the central nervous system and the Schwann cells are responsible for myelination of the peripheral nervous system. So this root entry or exit zone is actually the transformation zone, okay, between the myelination of the oligodendrocyte and the myelination of the Schwann cell. And they found that the root entry exit zone of the facial nerve is about 2 millimeter after its emergence from the pons, but it can go up to 21 millimeter. Okay. Yeah. So they use a grading system called the House-Brackmann facial nerve grading to grade the level of injury in facial nerve paralysis. Okay. So we saw the blood supply of the facial nerve, isn't it? Labyrinthine artery, the superficial petrosal artery, as well as the stylomastoid artery. Okay. The upper motor neurons is related to facial nerve. They are supplied by the middle cerebral artery, the motor cortex. The lower motor neurons in the pons is supplied by anterior-inferior cerebellar artery. Okay. The intraparotid course of the facial nerve within the parotid gland is supplied by transverse facial artery and superficial temporal artery. Okay. As I complete my presentation, I would like to share you these two pictures from Vishram Singh. It will help you to understand. Yeah, this table is very useful. You can understand the nuclei related to the facial nerve, its location, its extent. Okay. If possible, please go through these diagrams. Thank you. Any doubts, please enter in the comment section. Thanks a lot.